it was a wild day, obviously topped off with Russell Wilson, who the Steelers are set to meet with. Jerry Dulac first reported it. Sources have confirmed to me that that meeting is expected to happen this weekend. The Pittsburgh Steelers have ideas. I was told there's right now a 40 to 45% chance that the Pittsburgh Steelers land a deal with Russell Wilson, but there is a ton that goes into this. And I think the biggest one, obviously, is that the Pittsburgh Steelers do not view Russell Wilson as their starting quarterback in 2024, but rather as the backup to Kenny Pickett. And there is a lot that obviously comes with that. Why is the big question? And that is because they still have full faith in Kenny Pickett and what he can bring to this offense in year 3. They expect a big giant leap from this kid moving forward, especially with the new offensive coordinator. You ask why Russell Wilson would be the backup. It's simple. Kenny Pickett's had some injuries in the past. He's missed some games. They've had to turn to Mitch Trubisky in the past. That didn't work out. They're essentially looking for two things: a veteran mentor for Kenny Pickett and a reliable backup just in case Kenny Pickett doesn't work out or injuries continue to happen, and they believe Russell Wilson can lead them to the playoffs. You hear all that. What were your thoughts?
I'm just fascinated because, I don't know, I thought we had heard, maybe not from the Steelers directly, but from people all offseason, you figured anyone who came in to join the Steelers quarterback room was going to be competition for Kenny Pickett, that he was going to have to earn his way back to a starting job. And so I'm just kind of stunned that this would come out so soon. Maybe I would understand maybe if they believed that Russell Wilson is only a backup quality guy. But the idea that this would come out so soon, that this would be, right off the bat, Russell Wilson is automatically a backup, automatically a guy that is going to have to sit behind Kenny Pickett. He's an insurance plan is pretty stunning to me, because this is a guy who, I don't know, I get it. Last year's numbers weren't, I don't even know. Like, you look at Russell Wilson's numbers from last year and
they're pretty good.
Right. I had this impression of Russell Wilson in my head that was like, oh, he's washed, he's kind of past his prime. It doesn't really seem to be true.
No.
I'm really, really surprised that, first of all, he'd be willing to sign as a backup. Like, you're telling me there's no one else who would give Russell Wilson a starting job? I don't know. That seems pretty weird to me. But also that the Steelers wouldn't even consider him as a starting option, wouldn't even have a token competition with Kenny Pickett that would really shock me. And I'm kind of scratching my head wondering why they wouldn't even consider him for that role.
I agree. When I heard it, me and Nick were on the pod yesterday, and somebody asked about Russell Wilson. Does he make any sense? I said the same thing I've said for the last 2 weeks, and that is down in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine, I've been told, and I was telling you guys left and right, Russell Wilson, the Steelers have interest in Russell Wilson. And then I laughed. I actually laughed on the podcast when somebody said, or when it came out of my mouth, that they view him as a veteran leader, as a mentor to Kenny Pickett or whoever. Because my first thought is, Russ is doing high knees on the plane and he's got his own office and there's all this crazy stuff. And apparently, from what I've been told, they're not worried about that. None of that is, or most of that is overblown or definitely exaggerated by hearsay or the media or whoever. And people in Denver view Russell Wilson as a quality guy, a beloved teammate, and definitely a leader. When it comes to the stats and that side of it, I agree with you. I don't know how you sign Russell Wilson and say, dude, you threw for 3,000 yards last year, 26 touchdowns, and you are coming in here to be the backup to a guy who has, I believe, more interceptions than he does touchdowns, or very close to the same amount of touchdowns to interceptions in his career. That just, I don't know. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think that's where the 40 to 45% confidence in signing Russell Wilson comes in. I think it's less than 50% just because I don't think they're totally sold that Russ is going to sit around and say, before free agency starts, I'm going to ink a deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers to come in here and be Kenny Pickett's backup, because that just sounds like the best opportunity. I also don't think that, I don't know, maybe they are going to be that direct and say, hey, look it, you're the backup, you're the number 2, there's no competition. Maybe they'll interpret things different or say things different to leave things up for interpretation. I have no idea how that meeting is going to go. I just know how they view him And I mean, I think it's stunning. I think my second question here, when I heard all this and conversation was, it was deep enough, but there are parts and pieces that you learn, and there are parts of and pieces that you don't learn. And it's that, what was the view on Mason Rudolph? If Mason Rudolph comes back, which, I mean, it sounds as if the optimism of Mason Rudolph returning to the Pittsburgh Steelers is narrowing or dimming. And you look at that and you say, is that because he was told the same thing, that Kenny's the guy and that we need a veteran backup just in case Kenny goes down or isn't good enough? But I mean, is Omar just talking and saying, because you hear his interviews constantly. He talked to Jenna Harner the other day. She posted the clip on Twitter, and I laughed as soon as I saw it because she goes, do you think you'll have a quarterback signed in the next week? And he just said, you know what? Competition is good at every position, except for the quarterback, apparently, and I just don't know how they viewed Mason Rudolph, and if they were just kind of talking out their ass about, hey, we're going to have a competition.
Well, it makes me wonder how long Kenny Pickett's leash is.
Yeah, true.
Sign Russell Wilson as a backup, and what would it take for Wilson to be considered as an option? Is
True.
it only an injury? Is it only if Kenny Pickett's unable to go, or is it, Kenny Pickett has looked, subpar in the game and that game and this, that, and the other. So let's bring in Russell Wilson. It's that's the part that's interesting to me. It's like, what would it take to see Wilson in a game and to see
True.
him leap over Kenny Pickett? Because if he's there just as insurance, if he's there to be a Mitch Trubisky, quite honestly, I feel like that's a waste of resources. That's a waste of his talents.
I agree. What's the difference? If you're, I get it. Like, the exact words to me were, they believe Russell Wilson could be a guy that could lead this team to the postseason if he's called upon. But what would be if you're hoping Kenny Pickett works out, what would be the difference between him or a Ryan Tannehill or a Mason Rudolph? I get, like, Mitch Trubisky isn't going to lead you to the postseason. We understand that one. But I believe there's enough confidence in the rest of these guys that maybe they could lead. Like, why is your bar so high for a backup quarterback? You're spot on with the leash thing. Like, I just don't. Are they just going to wait until week one where they bench him? And are they willing to? I think that's another question. Like, are they willing to look at this and say, we could have quarterback controversy come week 4? Like, are they setting themselves up for the same situation that they set themselves up with when they signed Mitch Trubisky and drafted Kenny Pickett, where you're a couple games in, the entire fan base absolutely hates Kenny Pickett, and there are chants at Acrisure Stadium saying bench Kenny? Like, is that what they're setting them? It kind of feels like that's what they're headed towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Which just doesn't seem pleasant for anyone involved.
No.
And it's like, are we going to be sitting at training camp and we're going to see that Wilson? I mean, this is all, this is hypotheticals, but it's just, I don't know. Like, you don't want to count out Kenny Pickett just yet, but
exactly.
It's just, if that is your plan, if your plan is Russell Wilson as a backup to Kenny Pickett, I wonder what they see in Kenny Pickett right now that makes them so confident that he is the surefire starting guy versus, what makes you, what would knock them off of that confidence? That's my biggest question.
And like you said, training camp. Remember, I mean, you could go back to Mitch Trubisky's first season with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He threw 2 passes and somebody yelled from the stands, like they just started booing. Like, Steelers fans aren't going to hold back. Nobody's going to hold back and say, hey, look at Kenny. We're going to give Kenny a full season. We're going to see what happens. No. And why is it just doesn't, none of it lines up to what Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin have said, outside of Mike Tomlin that one time saying, we believe that our starting quarterback is on the roster, which makes sense because, well, Kenny Pickett's on the roster and he's the only one on the roster, and that's how they viewed it. But the rest of it doesn't make almost any sense whatsoever. Do you think that if Russ does, what's your confidence level in Russ signing at all if he is provided a backup role? Do you think there's another place he could? I mean, I don't know. Like, you list him off. Kirk Cousins sounds like he's going to Atlanta. Justin Fields, who knows where he goes. J.J. McCarthy is now the favorite. It almost sounds as if the Denver Broncos are going to be the only team without a quarterback, and Russ isn't going back to Denver. He's the reason that any team is willing to sign Russ for $2 million or $1.2 million. Maybe that's the case. Like, maybe they just kind of view it. Maybe both sides view it as there's not going to be another option, and maybe Russ is just looking at it going, I got a pretty good idea that Kenny Pickett isn't going to work out.
Yeah, I guess that could be true. But
It's
I'm
not
pretty
ideal.
sure. Yeah, like that doesn't make any sense to me, to be quite honest
No.
with you. I think Russell Wilson still has some stuff left in the tank. I don't like if you're one of these teams that is, I don't know, if you're like a I don't know, if you are in Atlanta, if you are
Yes.
a I'm trying to think of the other teams that need quarterbacks, but
Minnesota. That's
Minnesota,
really
yeah,
it. There's
Minnesota. Why is
but
Minnesota not all over this? You know?
I agree with that. But Minnesota, like you read the reports, they're trying to land JJ McCarthy. They're thinking about moving up to go get JJ McCarthy. You got all the guys in the top 10 that are going to land quarterbacks. Maybe Washington is left without a quarterback. Maybe Russ goes to Washington, but I feel like Washington's a very tricky situation. But is it worse than being a backup to Kenny Pickett? Just like, who
I'm
knows?
just yeah, like I really don't believe that Russ would sign unless he knew that there was path to being a starter at
Yeah.
least. And
I,
I like it just coming into Pittsburgh. I can't imagine Russ would look at a competition with Kenny Pickett or even a situation where he's backing up Kenny Pickett. It doesn't say to himself, "Well, this is easy. Like I could beat out Kenny Pickett in a competition. I can show in training camp that I'm better than him." Like I have a hard time believing that anyone looks at Russell Wilson versus Kenny Pickett and at this point in time says Kenny Pickett is 1000% the guy that we have to roll with, you know?
I
And
agree.
that's I don't want to like count him out, like I said, but there has to at least be a competition, right? There, like I don't think Kenny is. I don't know. I don't. I think that Kenny just hasn't really earned that, quite frankly. Like he hasn't earned the
Agreed.
benefit of the doubt in that sense.
Agreed. Agreed. You look at that. I mean, look at he got Mitch Trubisky benched. That bar is incredibly low, and then lost his job to Mason Rudolph. Bar goes from bare minimum to like a barely above bare minimum. Like you're spot on there. He's never earned that. Do you think that there's a chance that Russ comes in here and during training camp that switches? We're all in on Kenny Pickett because I expect Kenny Pickett to look good during training camp. Everybody looks good during training camp. Do you think there's an opportunity or a hypothetical where Russ comes in here and the roles reverse, and then it turns into, because my immediate thought was this is an Aaron Rodgers, Zach Wilson situation where the Steelers just they want a winner right now, and they want to see what their third-year quarterback is capable of developing into behind a proven starter in the NFL. I mean, do you think there's a chance that switches? Like, if he does come in here, do you think that the Steelers can deny? And do you think that the Steelers would deny? Because that's two totally different questions. Knowing who Mike Tomlin is and knowing how the general public would react to a situation, do you think there's the chance that could switch once they are here?
I don't think it would happen in training camp. I think they would give Kenny, looks during the regular season before they said
Yeah.
anything definite about what he can or can't do or what his status with the team is. Yeah, I think they would want to see it during the regular season because, like you said, the preseason training camp, it can all be kind of a misnomer.
Yes.
You can, I mean, we thought this offense was going to be the second coming.
I was going to say, Kenny Pickett looked like a superstar in the preseason.
Right, and so I think with that in mind, they're going to take everything good and bad during the preseason with a massive, massive, massive grain of salt. No one is going to earn or lose anything. I think during training camp, things are going to be much more scrutinized, but there's also going to be a sense of, well, we're going to make some quick decisions during the regular season. We're not going to let things get off the rails as quickly as we did last year.
What's your confidence level in Kenny Pickett right now as we currently stand?
I mean, I don't know how to really word that, but it's not necessarily that high. I don't know. Like it's not low either. It's just very, you got to prove something, it's not like, I think you can win with Kenny Pickett. I'll put it that way. I think you can win at the level that the Steelers want to win at with Kenny Pickett.
What level is that? Do you looking Super Bowl or are you looking winning
like
season?
win multiple games in the playoffs. I think you can do that.
Okay.
I think that's possible. I think that's possible, but it's a ceiling that Kenny's got to reach, or it's a level that Kenny's got to reach. I won't necessarily say it's a ceiling either.
Yeah.
I think I do kind of subscribe to the idea that we haven't seen all of Kenny Pickett yet. We've
Yeah.
seen him in a bad scheme, with an imperfect roster, with as he's dealt with a couple injuries. Like it hasn't always been smooth sailing. So I think I don't think it's ridiculous to say, okay, Kenny is theoretically in a better situation now. He's got some more support around him. Let's see what he can do in that situation.
Yeah.
And before we really sink him, and I think that's about where I'm at.
Okay. I think I agree. I think I agree. I don't think we've seen the most of Kenny Pickett. I'm very worried that the parts that are bad about Kenny Pickett, the missing open wide receivers, the almost afraid to stand in the pocket, I'm nervous that those things don't ever go away. I think winning wise, he could do a lot more with a better play caller, and he's going to get a better play caller. I think he could do a lot more. If the running game is as good in week 1 as it is in week 17, which hasn't been the case the last 2 years, I think that if that's the case, he could improve. I don't know where the ceiling is. I agree with you. I don't think I'm all out on him, but I still don't think I hold him to the bar of Russell Wilson. But apparently the Pittsburgh Steelers do. That is what we hear so far. There will be a lot more that comes from this story. Like over the weekend, they are expected to meet. I would expect us to come in here on Monday, sit down, have a podcast, and talk about how that meeting went, what we're hearing, and whether or not the Pittsburgh Steelers sound like they're going to sign Russell Wilson or not sign Russell Wilson. There's a lot of craziness. Good.
Do you think if a deal gets done that it gets done quickly, or do you think Wilson's going to kind of explore his options a little bit more?
No, I think a deal gets done quickly. I think within, I would say free agency opens on Wednesday. I would say by Wednesday, whether or not Russell Wilson's going to come to Pittsburgh. And I think it goes both ways. Like I'm not going to say he's going to sign elsewhere by Wednesday. I'm just saying that you have an idea of whether or not Russell Wilson's going to end up in Pittsburgh or not in Pittsburgh by Wednesday. I would think that's when that's going to happen.
Yeah, I guess there's a reason why the Steelers are kind of. I think they're the only team reported to have a meeting with Wilson at all. They seem to be the only team interested. Period.
That's what I'm saying. I just don't. I think it might come down to circumstance and people just being like, we don't really want Russ right now, which is wild to me. But if that's the case, the Steelers might just. It might be the Justin Fields situation in a different aspect of just. Look, we could use a 3rd round pick on Justin Fields, or we could just sign Russell Wilson for no money and see if that works out. And honestly, I think I'm okay with both of those because neither of them cost you much at all. But as a backup, that's just wild. But again, we'll find out. I would expect Wednesday. I would say Wednesday is my expectation on when we know whether or not Russell Wilson's going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, and then things get super, super crazy.